We're starting the blessedness of suffering for Christ. Okay. If you are reproached for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the presence of the glory and the Spirit of God rest upon you. But let none of you suffer as a murderer or a thief or an evildoer or as a busybody. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not be ashamed, but let him be by the name bring glory to God. Here, Peter says the greatest things of all. He says that if a man suffers for Christ, the presence of the glory rests upon him. In the Greek, this is a very strange phrase. Literally, the Greek is the presence of the glory. We think this can only mean one thing. The Jews had the conception of what they called the Shekinah. The Shekinah was the luminous glow of the very presence of God. This is a conception which constantly recurs in the Old Testament. In the morning, says Moses, then shall ye see the glory of the Lord. The glory of the Lord abode upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered its 6 days. When the law was being delivered to Moses, Exodus 24:16. In the tabernacle, God was to meet with Israel, and the tabernacle was to be sanctified with his glory. When the tabernacle was completed, then a cloud covered the tent of the congregation, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. When the Ark of the Covenant was brought into Solomon's temple, read that the cloud filled the house of the Lord so that the priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord had filled the house of the Lord. Repeatedly, this idea of the Shekinah, the glowing luminous glory of God in the visible light, occurs in the Old Testament. It is Peter's conviction that something of that glow of glory rests on the man who suffers for Christ. When Stephen was on trial for his life, and when it was certain that he would be condemned to death, to those who looked, on his face was a face of an angel. The reproach of suffering for Christ becomes a glory, something of the very glory of God rests on the man who suffers for Christ. Peter goes on to point out that it is a Christian that a man must suffer, and not as an evildoer. The evils which Paul singles out are all clear enough until we come to the last. A Christian, Peter says, is not to suffer as in, alatrophyscopos. The trouble is that there is no other instance of this word in Greek, and Peter may well have invented it. We have to try to work out its meaning. It can have 3 possible meanings, all of which would be relevant. It comes from 2 words, alotros, meaning belonging to another, eskikos, meaning looking upon or looking into. The word, therefore, means looking upon or into that which belongs to another. To look on that which is someone else's good might well be to cast covetous eyes upon them. That is how both the Latin Bible and the Calvin takes this word. They take it to mean that the Christian must not be covetous. To look upon that which belongs to another might well mean to be too interested in another person's affairs, to be a meddling busybody. That, in fact, is by far the most probable meaning of the word. There are Christians who are meddlesome busybodies. and who do an infinite deal of harm with their unwise and misguided interference and criticism and interventions. This would mean that I lost the phrase. This would mean that the good sense, we believe that it gives the best sense. 3, but there is a third possibility. Allotrios means that which belongs to someone else. That is to say, that which is alien and foreign to oneself. If we look for the meaning of the word along with the line of alloteria, will mean looking upon that which is foreign or alien to oneself. That would mean of a Christian being guilty of conduct, being guilty of entering upon undertakings which are alien to Christian and which do not benefit the Christian life. This then would be a warning that a Christian must never interest himself in the things or engage in a trade or enter on a course of action which is alien and foreign to the life that a Christian should lead. While all three meanings are possible, and while all three warnings are relevant, we think that the third meaning is the right one. It is Peter's injunction that if a Christian has to suffer for Christ, he must suffer in such a way that his suffering brings glory to God and to the name he bears. His life and conduct must be the best argument that he does not deserve the suffering which has come upon him. By his general conduct in life and by his attitude to the suffering he has to bear, he must command the name he bears. Commend the name he bears. All right. What do you think?
Well, there's a lot there. That's a very...
I'm sorry?
I said that's a very rich passage. I mean, the first thing that caught my attention was a couple of months ago, I saw a documentary about Jewish Kabbalah. Checked a book out of the library, and the author kept throwing around that term Shekinah in a variety of contexts, with Barclay identifies as the luminous glow of the presence of God. And it was so confusing for me. I kept having to page back to the glossary to see exactly what that meant. But I like Barclay's definition. Is very, very concise. Is Robert with us today?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Well, last week you were asking about Kierkegaard, and I reread both his sermon and his essay on love hiding a multitude of sins. In the sermon, he goes with a kind of, I guess maybe kind of a Lutheran view, because he talks a little bit about Luther's view of the inner preacher, our conscience. And then he expands on that by saying that it's in Christ's love that our sins are forgiven, forgotten, and hidden. But then in the essay, which is written for a more general audience, I guess, although I don't pretend to understand him, he says that there's a way, if we can't avoid sinning, and if we can't be as universally loving as we might be, the very least we can do is avoid spreading sin around, right? And one way in which sin multiplies is through slander and gossip. So, in his view, maybe a reformed criminal is on higher moral ground than somebody who's a slanderer or a gossiper, because they're always, pointing focus on other people's sins. So we see actually a lot of sin, maybe more than actually exists, although that's probably, a tall order. So I liked what he had to say about and what Barclay says about the interfering busybodies, because the interfering busybodies, according to Kierkegaard's essay, they have a way of expanding and amplifying this sin. Kierkegaard says at least we can avoid slander, and if not, just shut up. And better yet, try to be empathetic toward the person who might be identified in the slander. Well, you know, maybe Bob wasn't having his best day. Maybe Jill, you know, was under a lot of stress. You know, we don't really explain the sin away, but we can kind of, you know, express some kind of empathy through our viewpoint.
Yeah, I looked him up. I looked up his page, and there's quite a lot about him on Wikipedia. It's a very lengthy essay on him. And
Oh yeah.
yeah. So I gather he had problems with the institutional church, but he fully endorsed Nicene Creed, for instance.
Yeah, that's. I mean, he was devout, a Christian, actually a fairly, you know, Luther was one of his great resources. But I think, you know, and you know, to be fair, Kierkegaard was, and I like this about him, he was a real oddball. He was a real outsider in a lot of ways. And that's kind of appealing to me. But being a real outsider, he had a tendency to shoot himself in the foot. And he owned a press for a while. And by way of attacking pointing out the shortcomings of the Danish Lutheran Church, he ended up attacking this bishop who was potentially his boss, to say if he could ever follow through with the ordination. And when I looked up the bishop, Havner was thought by the people to be very benign, very generous man, you know, reform-minded, so that it was a little bit like writing essays attacking Desmond Tutu. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And, so you know, Kierkegaard could get off on a tangent in his private life.
So,
Okay.
Pastor, about this, the glow that he mentions,
The Shekinah.
that's mentioned here. Yeah, I've heard of people on their deathbed seeing this glow, or if not the actual image of Christ. But as far as the glow descending on the person himself who's dying,
Yeah.
have you ever witnessed that with all your experience at Christian deathbeds?
At the Christian deathbed, no.
No. I mean that seems
The
a very
Shekinah,
special event.
yeah, it is, and the Shekinah is a theophany. That is like the burning bush.
Uh-huh.
It's something that tells us that God is present. We talk about the Shekinah. That's you know, that's more than just a special thing. And you may see it in peace in people, people who've had maybe a near-death experience, and they think they saw the Shekinah. You know, those things are for them. For what we have in the Scripture is what's revealed to us. But for those who have had special visions and stuff like that, that they claim, those were for them, and they were not for us to get it in the depth of to what this person saw and things like that, because it can very easily lead away from what we have actually revealed. And that we get back to where Peter says that you know, he's a witness of all this stuff, yet there's a more firm witness, and that's the word, and directs us to the word, not even to himself and his witness. But of course, the word is what he revealed in his letters. So we have that, and also what was revealed in his sermons that we get from Mark. But the Shekinah is a special for the theophany of the presence of God. And, you know, David says, I don't want to leave your presence. I have to believe that David saw the Shekinah, that he was in the presence of the Shekinah, and that he had, complete peace and saw tremendous beauty in that experience. And think of
It
that.
almost
That's
sounds like
something that we will all have.
yeah. It
Okay.
almost sounds like the Catholic phrase, beatific vision. Similar, if not exactly the same.
Well, we're talking about the presence of God.
Yes.
And besides very significant reverence to that, it's a blessing for us to be able to be in his presence. And we should certainly, with our senses, be able to determine and enjoy his presence. So let's go on to the next section now. And Dennis, we want to take that?
Sure. Entrusting all life to God, 1 Peter 4:17-19. For the time has come for judgment to begin from the household of God, and if it begins from us, what will be the end of those who disobey the good news which comes from God? And if the righteous man is scarcely saved, where will the impious man and the sinner appear? So then, let those who suffer in accordance with the will of God entrust their souls to him, who is a creator on whom you can rely and continue to do right. As Peter saw it, it was all the more necessary for the Christian to do right because judgment was about to begin. It was to begin with the household of God. Ezekiel hears the voice of God proclaiming judgment upon his people. Begin at my sanctuary in Ezekiel. Where the privilege has been greatest, there the judgment will be sternest. If judgment is to fall upon the church of God, what will be the fate of those who have been utterly disobedient to the invitation and command of God? Peter confirms his appeal with a quotation from Proverbs 11. If the righteous is requited on earth, how much more the wicked and the sinner? Finally, Peter exhorts his people to continue to do good and, whatever happens to them, to entrust their lives to God, the creator of whom they can rely. The word he uses for to entrust is parathesiaste, something, which is the technical word for depositing money with a trusted friend. In the ancient days, there were no banks and few really safe places in which to deposit money. So before a man went on a journey, he often left his money in the safekeeping of a friend. Such a trust was regarded as one of the most sacred things in life. The friend was absolutely bound by all honor and all religion to return the money intact. Herodotus was a story about such a trust. A certain Milesian came to Sparta, for he had heard that the strict honor of the Spartans had entrusted his money to a certain Gelasius. He said that in due time his sons would reclaim the money and would bring tokens which would establish their identity beyond doubt. The time passed and the sons came. Gelasius treacherously said that he had no recollection of any money being entrusted to him and said that he wished 4 months to think about it. The Milesians departed sad and sorry. Gelasius consulted the gods as to what he ought to do, and they warned him that he must return the money. He did so, but before long he died and all his family followed him. And in the time of Herodotus, there was not a single member of his family left alive because the gods were angry that he had even contemplated breaking the trust reposed in him. Even to think of evading such a trust was a mortal sin. If a man entrusts himself to God, God will not fail him. If such a trust is sacred to men, how much more is it sacred to God? This is the very word used by Jesus when he says, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. Jesus unhesitantly entrusted his life to God, certain that he would not fail him, and so may we. The old advice is still good advice. Trust in God and do the right.
Okay. Any thoughts?
So be it.
Okay. Well, the only thought that I had at this time was that, Peter's over in Ephesus, not Peter, John's over in Ephesus, and Ephesus has that temple of Artemis. Understand it was one of the 7 wonders of the world, of the ancient world. And besides the cultic practices involved there, it was also the bank for the Roman government, a fortified place for safekeeping. Now, I don't know what the history after that is, but I do have that knowledge. So if you entrust something to a friend, obviously you expect that is safe. We entrust ourselves to God, trusting that though we die, he will raise us from the dead, just like he did Christ. Okay, let's go on. Susan, you want to take that section?
The elders of the church, 1 Peter 5, 1-4. So then, as your fellow elder and a witness of the suffering of Christ, as a sharer in the glory which is going to be revealed, I urge the elders who are among you, shepherd the flock of God which is in your charge, not because you are coerced into doing so, but of your own free will, as God would have you do, not to make a shameful profit out of it, but with enthusiasm, not as if you aim to be petty tyrants over those allotted to your care, but as being under the obligation to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the unfading crown of glory. Few passages show more clearly the importance of the eldership in the early church. It is to the elders that Peter specifically writes, and he who was the chief of the apostles does not hesitate to call himself a fellow elder. It will be worth our while to look at something of the background and history of eldership, the most ancient and the most important office in the church. 1. It has a Jewish background. The Jews trace the beginning of the eldership to the days when the children of Israel were journeying through the wilderness to the promised land. There came a time when Moses felt the burdens of leadership too heavy for him to bear alone, and to help him, 70 elders were set apart and granted a share of the Spirit of God. Numbers 11. Thereafter, elders became a permanent feature of Jewish life. We find them as friends of the prophets, as the advisors of kings, and as the colleagues of princes in the administration and affairs of the nations. Every village and city had its elders. They met at the gate and dispensed justice to the people. The elders were administrators of the synagogue. They did not preach, but they saw to the good government and order of the synagogue. and they exercised discipline over its members. The elders formed a large section of the Sanhedrin, the Supreme Court of the Jews, and they are regularly mentioned along with the chief priests and the rulers and the scribes and the Pharisees. In the vision of the book of Revelation, in the heavenly places there are 24 elders around the throne. The elders were woven into the great structure of Judaism, both in its civil and its religious affairs. 2. The eldership has a Greek background. Especially in Egyptian communities, we find that elders are the leaders of the community and responsible for the conduct of public affairs, much as town councilors are today. We find a woman who had suffered an assault appealing to the elders for justice. When corn is being collected as payment on the visit of a governor, we find that the elders of the cultivators are the officials concerned. We find them connected with the issue of public aid edicts, the leasing of lands for pasture, and the collection of taxation. In Asia Minor also, the members of the council were called elders. Even in the religious communities of the Gentile world, we find elder priests who were responsible for discipline. In the Sokophos temple, we find the elder priest dealing with the care of a priest who is charged with allowing his hair to grow too long and with wearing woolen garments, actions which were considered unmanly and too luxurious, and of which no priest should have been guilty. We can see that long before Christianity took it over, elders was a title of honor both in the Jewish and the Greco-Roman world.
Okay. The 24 elders, Revelation, represent the Old Testament church and the New Testament church.
Why 24? How was that number decided?
Well, 12 tribes of Israel.
Uh-huh.
Okay, that 12 tribes of Israel are the children of Israel. That was those were the chosen people. Those were the nation God chose to use as an example for the world to learn, and from which people his son would come, specifically from the line of Judah. And when I say Israel, that's Jacob. Remember, his name was changed, and that those 12 tribes represented who the children of Israel were when they came out of Egypt to the promised land. Jesus established 12 apostles. He's establishing a new covenant. The old covenant was under the 12 tribes. The new covenant was under the 12 apostles. And they're called ruling apostles. But their ruling is in living, explaining, witnessing to the gospel of Jesus Christ and having the disciples conform to what Christ had taught. So it was the New Testament church, which was established by the apostles with Jesus Christ as a cornerstone. And that 12 apostle idea, again, represents the chosen people. So you hear specifically that these are the chosen people from Paul. And so 12 Old Testament, 12 New Testament. Remember, you're working with signs and symbols. Okay. Let's go on then. Let's see. Buddy, how about hearing from you?
The perils and privileges of eldership, 1 Peter 5, continued. Peter sets down in a series of contrasts the perils and privileges of the eldership, and everything he says is applicable, not only to the eldership, but also to all Christian service inside and outside the church. The elder is to accept office not under coercion, but willingly. This does not mean that a man is to grasp at office or to enter upon it without self-examining thought. Any Christian will have a certain reluctance to accept high office because he knows only too well his unworthiness and inadequacy. There is a sense in which it is by compulsion that a man accepts office and enters upon Christian service. Necessity, said Paul, is laid upon me. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. The love of Christ controls us, he said. But on the other hand, there is a way of accepting office and of rendering service as if it were a grim and unpleasant duty. It is quite possible for a man to agree to a request in such an ungracious way that his whole action is spoiled. Peter does not say that a man should be conceitedly or irresponsibly eager for office, but that every Christian should be anxious to render such service as he can, although fully aware how unworthy he is to render it. The elder is to accept office, not to make a shameful profit out of it, but eagerly. The word for making a shameful profit is the word escroqueles. The noun from this is eskerderdia, and it was a characteristic which the Greek loathed. Theophrastus, the great Greek delineator of character, has a character sketch of this escroderdia, meanness, as it might be translated, is a desire for base gain. The mean man is he who never sets enough food before his guests and who gives himself a double portion when she is carrying the Hello?
We're here.
Yes.
Oh, pardon me. It was regarding the tow truck on the landline. Did somebody take over or shall I continue?
No, nobody took over. We thought you would be back any second, so we waited. a couple.
Okay. Let's even if we go no further than this, it would mean that the office of eldership and indeed any piece of service offered to you is never earned by any merit. Oh, am I in the right place? Yeah. By any merit of our own, but always allotted to us by God. It is never something that we have deserved, but always something given to us by the grace of God. But we can go further than this. Kieros means something which is allotted to a man. In Deuteronomy, we read that Israel is the heritage, Kieros, of God. That is to say, Israel is the people especially assigned to God by his own choice. Israel is the Kieros of God. The congregation is the Kieros of the elder. Just as Israel is allotted to God, an elder's duties in the congregation are allotted to him. This must mean that the whole attitude of the elder is to his people must be the same as the attitude of God to his people. Here we have another great thought. In verse 2, there is a phrase in the Best Greek manuscript which is not in the Authorized or Revised Standard Versions. They've translated it, shepherd the flock of God which is in your charge, not because you are coerced into doing so, but of your own free will as God would have you to do. As God would have you to do is in Greek katatheon, and that could well mean quite simply like God. Peter says to the elders, shepherd your people like God. Just as Israel is God's special allotment, the people we have to serve in the church or anywhere else are our special allotment, and our attitude to them must be the attitude of God. What an idea, and what a condemnation. It is our task to show to people forbearance, his forgiveness, his seeking love, his illimitable service. God has allotted to us a task, and we must do it as he himself would do it. That is the supreme ideal of service in the Christian church.
Well, we skipped a little bit here and there.
Depending on your edition.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I came back to the. Okay, let me start over here.
We're on about the third paragraph, the end of the third paragraph of perils and privileges of the eldership.
Yeah, the elder is to accept office, not to make a shameful profit out of it, but eagerly. The word for making a shameful profit is the adverb askoderdes. The noun from this is askoderdia. As it was a characteristic which the Greek loathed. Theophrastus, the great Greek delineator of character, has a character sketch of this askoderdia, meanness, as it might be translated, as desire for base gain. The mean man is he who never sets enough food before his guests and who gives himself a double portion when he is carving the joint, roast. He orders the wine, he goes to the theater only when he can get a free ticket. He never has enough money to pay the fare and always borrows from his fellow passengers. When he is selling corn, he uses a measure in which the bottom is pushed up, and even then he carefully levels the top. He counts the half radishes left over from dinner in case the servants eat any. Rather than give a wedding present, he will go away from home when a wedding is in the offing. Meanness is an ugly fault. It is quite clear that there were people in the early church who accused the preachers and missionaries of being in the job for what they could get out of it. Paul repeatedly declares that he coveted no man's goods and worked with his hands to meet his own needs so that he was burdensome to no man. It is certain that the payment any early office bearer received was pitifully small, and the repeated warnings that the office bearers must not be greedy for gain shows that there were those who coveted more. The point that Peter is making, and it is ever valid, is that no man dare accept office or render service for what he can get out of it. His desire must ever be to give and not to get. The elder is to accept office, not to be a petty tyrant, but to be the shepherd and the example of the flock. Human nature is such that for many people, prestige and power are even more attractive than money. There are those who love authority, even if it is to be exercised in a narrow sphere. Milton's Satan thought it better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. Shakespeare spoke about proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, playing such fantastic tricks before high heaven as would make the angels weep. The great characteristic of the shepherd is his selfless care and his sacrificial love for the sheep. Any man who enters an office with the desire for preeminence has got his whole point of view upside down. Jesus said to his ambitious disciples, "You know that those who are supposed to rule over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all."
And that is a definition of the ruling apostle. And it's interesting to see how it played out in their lives as they set the examples. All right. Well, let's go on.
Let's go back and do the Christian eldership,
Okay.
which we skipped.
The idea of the eldership, being as I read the second half, do you want me to just read the first half and read through?
Where are you starting? When we turn to the Christian church, we find that the eldership is its basic office. Is that where you're going to start?
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
That's
sure.
what we skipped, yeah.
That's the part we skipped.
When we turn to the Christian church, we find that the eldership is its basic office. It was Paul's custom to ordain elders in every community to which he preached and in every church which he founded. On the first missionary journey, elders were ordained in every church. Titus is left in Crete to ordain elders in every city. The elders had charge of the financial administration of the church. It is to them that Paul and Barnabas deliver the money sent to relieve the poor of Jerusalem in the time of famine. The elders were the counselors and administrators of the church. We find them taking a leading part in the Council of Jerusalem, at which it was decided to fling open the doors of the church to the Gentiles. At that council, the elders and apostles are spoken of together as the chief authorities of the church. When Paul came on his last visit to Jerusalem, it was to the elders that he reported, and they suggested the course of action he should follow. One of the most moving passages in the New Testament is Paul's farewell to the elders of Ephesus. We find there that the elders, as he sees them, are the overseers of the flock of God and the defenders of the faith. We learn from James the elder had a healing function in the church through prayer and anointing. From the pastoral epistles, we learned that they were rulers and teachers, and by that time paid officials. When a man enters the eldership, no small honor is conferred upon him, for he is entering on the oldest religious office in the world, whose history can be traced through Christianity and Judaism for 4,000 years, and no small.
Just lost buddy.
Yeah.
Responsibility falls upon him, for he has been ordained a shepherd of the flock of God and a defender of the faith.
Okay.
So did he start the ideal of the leadership, or did he go partway through it? I had trouble finding where he was.
The perils, the partnership of the elders, he covered.
Right. The next section is when he came back. Somewhere's in that section he started. I don't know if he started from the beginning or partway through, but he did go to the end. I know that.
Yeah, we're at the ideal of the eldership.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if he started at the beginning of that or halfway through. I know he.
I think he just got. I think he did not begin that.
So do you want to start there then?
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
well, Robert, let's hear from you.
All right. Ideal of the eldership, 1 Peter 5. There is one thing in this passage which defies translation, and which is yet one of the most precious and significant things in it. In verse 3, the Authorized Version has it that elders are forbidden to be lords over God's heritage. It will be noted that the word God is printed in the Authorized Version in italic letters, which means that it is not present in the Greek and has been added by the translators to clarify the sense. We have translated it that the elders are not to aim to be petty tyrants over those who are allotted to their care. The phrase which the Authorized Version translates God's heritage, in which we have translated those who are allotted, is curious in Greek. It is ton kleron, which is a genitive plural. The significance is in this word kleros. Kleros is in the nominative. Kleros is a word of extraordinary interest. It begins by meaning a dice or a lot. It is so used in Matthew 27:35, which tells how the soldiers beneath the cross were throwing dice to see who should possess the seamless robe of Christ. Second, it means an office gained or assigned by lot. It is a word used in Acts 1:26, which tells how the disciples cast lots to see who should inherit the office of the traitor, office of Judas the traitor. It then comes to mean an inheritance allotted to someone, as it is used in Colossians 1:12, where it is used for the inheritance of the saints. In classic Greek, it very often means a public allotment or estate of land. These allotments were distributed by the civic authorities to the citizens. Very often this distribution was made by drawing lots for the various pieces of land available for distribution. Now, even if we were to go no further than this, it would mean that the office of the eldership, that any piece of service offered to us is never earned by any merit of our own. It is always allotted to us by God. It's not something that we have deserved. It is something which is given to us by the grace of God. But we can go further into this. Kleros means something which is allotted to man. It is something which has been specially assigned to him. Now in Deuteronomy 9:29 we read that Israel is the inheritance of God, and the word is kleros. That is to say, Israel is the people specially allotted to God, specially assigned to God by God's own will and choice. Israel is the kleros of God. The congregation is the kleros of the elder. Just as Israel is allotted to God, an elder's duties in the congregation are allotted to him. That must mean this, that the whole attitude of the elder, or of anyone who takes up any service to his people, must be the same as the attitude of God to his people. Here we have another great thought. In verse 2 there's a phrase in the best Greek manuscripts which is not in the Authorized Version. We have translated it, shepherd the flock of God, which is in your charge, not because you are coerced into doing so, but of your own freedom as God would have you to do. The phrase we have translated as God would have you to do is in Greek, katathion, and that could well mean simply like God. Peter says to the elders, shepherd your people like God. Just as Israel is God's special allotment, people we have to serve in the church or anywhere else are our special allotment. And the whole attitude to them must be the attitude of God. We must shepherd them like God. What a vision opened out. What an ideal. And what a condemnation. It is our task to show the people the forbearance of God, the forgiveness of God, the seeking love of God, the illimitable service of God. God has allotted to us a task to do, and we must do it as God himself would do it. That is the supreme ideal of service in the Christian church. So is it referring to the obligation of the elders and the ordained, or the obligation of the whole congregation?
That's a struggle within the church. It's been there. It's not in within church, the different denominations and the like. It's a question of, is it the ministry of the members or is it the ministry of the pastor? Realizing that we're talking here about pastors when they say elders in most cases. It has to do with the office of ministry, and the office of ministry is a separate office set aside by Christ to take care of his church. So it is more directed to that office, and all other offices of the church flow from that office, have their authority from that office. And that authority is service. So you're hearing how the church is to be organized and function. Let's see. So I didn't really answer your question because that's not really, it's a both and as far as I'm concerned. The office of ministry, the elder, the pastor has his office and responsibilities. Those that function within the church for ministry, they flow from his office. Those who function from administration, that's normally taken care of on the other side. It's not part of the call to which I've been called, which is called for ministry of word and sacrament. So normally the other church members, officers of the church, take responsibility for the running of the physical church. And why we have complete participation and representation through councils and voters' meetings. So that fits our polity, how we do business. Not all churches function that way. Okay, any other question? The Church of God is a very beautiful and challenging organization.
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, let me apologize for the interruption and confusion. I had sent out a text asking not to be interrupted if at all possible. But when I run into people, there's always a question like where the people, outsiders, critics of Christianity or people just interested in Christianity will kind of ask, like, where does the authority come from? Is it from the top down? Is it from the bottom up? And when I run into people, and, churches, and even churches that are quite large, like the Roman Catholic Church, and the Orthodox Church is really, properly speaking, Orthodox churches, just as Lutheran churches really Lutheran churches. But when I run into people, who are critical, who say, well, we're not really I can't really abide by, organized religion. My response is, well, it's evident to me you never belonged to a church. If you'd had, you'd realize how disorganized things can be.
Well, yeah. The church is a body of Christ, and everyone has a part. Well, let's close for today. Pray that you're all having a good week, and that we'll hear from you, see you on Sunday. Have a blessed week in that respect. And Susan, I'll get back to you after I've called Paul.